Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. I'm having Bede back again on our channel. Hi Bede, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank
Oh
you.
yeah, Bede. What time is it in Australia? Tell me again, please.
It's 20 past 8 in the afternoon, in the
Ah,
night, I should.
okay. We have 20
Uh,
past 12. That's interesting, in the
yeah,
noon. Okay, Bede. Today we are
beautiful.
going to talk about Indian bows, right? And I'm going to share something, a very beautiful bow from Walkowski's collection, right? So one of those famous collections. And after that, you're going also to show us some bows here where you have at your disposal. My suggestion is, as we discussed and talked about it before, I'm going to share first a short video of this bow from Walkowski's collection, Dr. von Walkowski's collection. Let me see. Okay. Hold on, please. Okay, Bede. I'm going to run it.
Yeah.
What kind of bow is this, Bede?
This is what's commonly called in archery history a Sindh bow, but which in Persian is called the chahr. This is it's also called that to some extent in some more advanced literature. I think McEwen did an article on this type of bow with cross sections, and I think they were being made as late as the 1920s.
Wow.
Though
Okay.
this one's quite old.
Yeah.
There's a couple of accounts of Englishmen in India in the 20s talking about seeing newly made bows, composite bows. So they were definitely around. Um,
Yeah. Yes.
I'm looking I'm looking really closely at this because every one of these bows is a bit of a work of art, and this
It
one is
is.
fairly unique in having such an excellent
Yes.
surviving string. Though there's a few pieces about the string that make me think that that string had been adapted to that bow rather than it was made for it, because it looks like see there appears to be a knot on each. Is that on both ends? Is there a knot on both ends of this? Yeah, there is, which
Yeah.
is like like three fingers or something from where the string divides.
Yes.
And normally that would be the knot where the two loops are tied, but you wouldn't normally make it this way. But if the original bow that string was made for had a longer ear, then the loop would be longer. And if you found that it was the right length for a bow you had, all you have to do is bind up part of the loop and it will look perfectly normal.
I mean, when I saw that, we talked about it. The creator asked me, he was not so sure if it is bending correctly. And he just asked me, please feel, just feel at home and you can just try to restring it. And I just said, no, thank you very much. I wouldn't touch an old bow. I was really afraid something is going to happen to that beads, right? If you,
Yeah, I can see why you might think there's something wrong with the stringing, but you would need a bow maker
yeah,
to reshape that. Once it was reshaped, it would stay in the right shape for a while.
yes,
But what it appears to me is its brace height is much too low. And I would assume that when these bows, generally speaking, is when you take the string off, the ends don't move very far. But originally they were quite strongly recurved and reflexed, I should say.
mm,
And when you string a bow like this, you can adjust the curvature near the handle and get it more open. You
yeah.
still have the setback in the handle, but it provides you with a little bit more depth when you're shooting, because the closer the string comes to your hand, the string doesn't, when the arrow leaves, it doesn't stop. It keeps going forward and then goes back. And depending on how taut the bow is, how long that lasts, you don't want to get hit in the wrist by the string of an 80-pound bow. It's not a pleasant
Pete,
experience.
what do you think? What is the poundage of this bow? I remember it was quite heavy. What do you
It's
think? What is the poundage
The
of this?
leaves are quite thick,
And thick, exactly.
and thickness equates to strength in composite bows. Um, I'm guessing it's like the bow that McEwen dissected, in that it has the horn on the belly is curved on the outside and on the inside, so that the belly is actually thicker in the middle than it is on the edges. This has lots of benefits that have been enumerated by Adam Karputz in his book on Ottoman bows. That ridge running down the middle of the back of the bending part of the bow.
Yeah.
This is a characteristic of Sindh bows. They can have one ridge, two
This
ridges,
one,
or
right?
yeah,
Exactly.
that's sinew. That's an extra layer of sinew. McEwen wondered whether it was just an archaic survival, because he pointed out that some Sasanian bows had in the art, not there weren't too many pieces of Sasanian bows that survived, but in the art they often look as though they've got ridges down the back of the bow. And he wonders whether this was a very unusual survival of that. I find that unlikely. The bow itself, all of its other structure is much different from the way Sasanian bows were put together. My understanding is, unlike, say, the wide-limbed Persian bows, that underneath the painting on the belly, there's a single strip of horn for each limb.
Oh.
And when you see the width of the limbs, they're not as big as, say, a Qajar bow.
No, they're
Qajar
not.
bow is much wider.
Much
And so
wider.
there's no need to use the multiple strip method. And to be honest, the crab bows, which is another type of bow that was popular in India, generally only have a strip that's about half the width of the bow. That's the horn on the belly. It's not as wide as the whole bow, and the rest of it's filled in with sinew and that to make it look like a bow like this, because aesthetically, that's what people wanted their bows to look like. However, you look at this, you've got a profoundly the belly side of the grip is curved, but if you look at you can see on that to me it's the right hand side of the picture, you can see that there is a distinct ridge on the back of the handle. It doesn't poke up.
This one, right?
But it would be, when you held it, you could feel it clearly. You could orient the bow properly without any problems at all. So, looking at it, it would be suitable for all of the standard methods for shooting. And you remember when we discussed grasps, you could use most of them on this.
Could it be over 100, the poundage?
I don't know. It's some of these bows are certainly up in the 80s, 90s and above. The ones that I'm guessing that if it had 3 strips on the back of extra sinew, this might be an indication that it's a much heavier bow. My guess for bows like this, to me, they look in the 80 to 90 pound range, but it's guessing. I've got a bow that has complex curves like that, and its limbs look, and again, I'm looking at a photograph. Your hand was in it a couple of times, or somebody's hand was in it a couple of times, and that gave me some scale. But a bow whose limbs were about that wide, with roughly this shape, came out to be about 60 pounds at 28 inches. So these limbs are wider and deeper. So it's going to be heavier.
And it is beautifully painted, huh?
Oh yeah, you can see the difference. And when I show you the bows I've got, I've got some nicely painted bows. One of them's in Taiwan at the moment with a bow maker who was interested in seeing if he could make one, and the other is away, packed away because it's in more delicate condition. But I've seen really nice ones. But there are a lot of ones that were repainted in the 19th century. They were refurbished essentially, and they painted them, and you can tell they're all from, like there'll be a workshop and every bow will be painted the same, and it'll have straight lines, and there won't be anything like this. This is what the bows were meant to look like. They were meant to be well decorated. They were meant to be striking without, being over the top. I mean, this, you might say this is over the top a bit. It's over the top compared to a wooden bow, but it's not over the top compared to other composite bows.
Yes.
Um,
Look at this picture, Pete. Now some more
yeah.
pictures.
And, what's really interesting is that there are like the bands of decoration near the grip and further down near the
This
knee
one,
where,
this one.
yeah,
Yeah, this one.
this is an old idea because the Mongol bow, well, the Mongol bows from 1400 that were excavated in Mongolia also had that kind of decoration done with little mosaics of different dyed bark. This is painted, but it's part of a long tradition. Because my guess is this is possibly early 1800s, something like that.
Yeah,
Could be earlier. Let's be honest.
yeah,
Uh, and an expert on the art of the time could probably identify when the painting was done by the nature of the painting.
yeah.
That's quite, that this is one of the things I think you notice it with, say, gold inlay on Persian armor. You
Yeah.
can pick it because that type of pattern, it's true with Turkish stuff too. That type of pattern was very popular in 1500 to
Yeah,
1520 or something.
yeah, it is true. You can tell.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we can go ahead and see here. Look at this now from the other side, some more pictures.
Yeah, look how they've also painted the belly. It you've been in the presence of it. Did it look to you like the belly was just painted, or did it look as though it was built up a bit with sinew and bark or something and then painted?
I don't
Because
remember it very well, to be honest.
yeah, I think it's so well painted, it's really hard to tell.
Yeah. I
I
just
mean,
remember when I saw it closely, I was mesmerized by its beauty. It was
yeah,
really something unbelievable.
it's starting. It's startlingly good in terms of its the finish, the concept of the design is really well thought out. The little medallions, the bands. I also looked at the the belly side of the grip. It's a smooth curve, so you've got this very oval grip, which makes it very easy to hold the bow straight.
Yeah.
Uh, an important thing. Uh,
Can you
the
explain the two different methods again? So once is
what do you mean for?
regarding the painting.
Oh, okay, right. So you can actually paint directly on the horn side,
Yes.
and there's quite a few bows in the Karlsruhe collection, Turkish bows, where it's
Yes.
quite clear that's what they did. Because you could they a couple had said in his book that you don't actually have to do a really fine polish on the horn because you can just paint over it with clear lacquer and
Yes.
then polish the lacquer. Um, I'm but you can then paint once you've sealed the horn, you can then paint on the horn directly.
Yes.
But it's if the paint is reasonably thick, which if they're using well, which they would be using expensive mineral pigments, it might be quite thick. That was the nature of like how they painted miniatures. Then it would be difficult to know whether you were looking at paint on horn or like on the back where they put a layer of bark, very, paper thin bark, or possibly even paper thin leather, and then painted on that. It's very difficult to tell them apart to know whether am I looking at the horn with paint on it, or am I looking at the horn with a fine layer of sinew and then leather or bark glued down to it. Now, why would you have a layer of bark there? To waterproof it. I'm sure that Adam in an article in the Archer Antiquaries Journal commented on an Indian bow which was painted directly on the sinew. But what they did was the layer of lacquer, then they glued on silver foil, and then they painted over that so that there was a, like silver leaf. It's thinner than aluminium foil that you'd use in the kitchen by about, a tenth of that thickness. They glued it over the sinew, and that provided the waterproof layer. And then they painted on top of it. They would have used some kind of gesso or something to make a surface that the paint would stick to. And this is, we look and say paint. We think in terms of you spray paint on, or you use epoxies that you put dyes in and that. But these people were at a proper painter's level of understanding of how to use pigments and things like that. They weren't, you didn't just have the painting done in the bowyer's workshop. You would send it to a nakash or something like this, somebody who was an expert, to finish it off.
Yes.
And you'd have to paint. That's why bows were expensive.
Yes. And the string is a very thick string, isn't it?
This is totally normal. And I'll show you some arrows later. And I've got a micrometer here. And I will show you the average width of a knock is between 4 and 5 millimeters.
Oh,
so that's totally normal to have a thick string like that. You'll notice also what's impressive about this, it's totally wrapped in silk thread.
Yes.
There's no exposed part of the core of that string anywhere.
No.
And one of the issues with Indian bowstrings is, in some regions, and I'm assuming it's places like Rajasthan, there's a lot of deserts and dry areas, that the core is actually gut.
Yeah.
Because despite many things written in Western literature about the uselessness of gut strings, they actually work quite well. And this is from experience, personal experience, using them with composite bows. And if they're prepared correctly, they don't stretch very much. This is the big argument about gut strings is, they stretch too much in higher humidity. Not if they're prepared correctly. The real problem with gut strings is it sounds like you're plucking a guitar string when you shoot an arrow. Covering them with silk like this might quieten them down. It was a belief in a lot of Oriental archery cultures that you got greater accuracy by using a thick string. And my feeling is that what was happening was thick strings don't oscillate as much when you release, and perhaps they imparted a more uniform force on the arrow when they were shot. They also are less prone to breakage, but most of these strings are much bigger than they have to be for the strength of the bow. Even if this was a 120-pound bow, a silk string, for instance, with a silk core, that thick would have no problem with it. I mean, on an 80 to 90-pound bow, I used, I think it was 24 strands in an endless loop for the core of the string of raw silk, of the thicker, they call it buttonhole silk. And that string never looked like it was going to break. You have a look at traditional Korean strings, silk strings, they can take tremendous acceleration. They don't break. So, but the thing that's interesting is they've used the colored silk bindings to create a design. And when you show us the center of the string, we'll be able to see they. I know you've got one at the center.
Should be one. Yeah, just a second, please.
Yeah, that's
here.
Yeah, if you notice, there's a place in the center of the string.
Here.
I'm just looking at that. That again makes me think this string's not really for this bow, because that place is either where you put the thumb ring or where you put the knock of the arrow, and it's right in the center of the grip, which never do. It would be unfortunate, to say the least. I mean, you can make the serving long enough that it doesn't matter which end is up. I found with one of the horn and sinew bows Adam made that I bought from him, that you could physically, when you strung it, you just work out which limb was the weakest, and that was the upper limb. and you could shoot it either way up. You didn't have to take the string off and put it back on. I did because I made short servings, but it's amazing how useful this type of composite bow is, because it looks, if you've got a long bow, you can only shoot it one way up. And if you've got some of the other types of composite bows, if you read the Arabic works where they're talking about bows that had one limb slightly longer than the other so that they could get the center of the pressure exactly on the arrow pass. Now, that's true, but you can make a symmetrical composite bow where the limbs are the same size and the ears are the same size and the grip is directly in the middle, and still, by bending it over your knee when you're stringing it and that, make one limb a little bit more flexible than the other, and so it shoots perfectly evenly. The real weird one are the Mongol bows they excavated, where the limbs and the ears added up to the same number, but they were different on each limb. So one limb, the bending part was, so long, and the ear was so long, and the other one, the bending part was shorter by that much, but the ear was longer by that much to get to the same length. So we've got to kind of not tie ourselves down that this is like it came out of a factory. Somebody, possibly a couple of people, because you might have had somebody beating the sinew and shredding it for you and all that kind of stuff if you had a proper shop, which whoever made this bow definitely did have. A group of people would sit down, they would make maybe 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 of these bows.
Yes.
And the best ones, they would then send off to an artist to decorate. The less good ones, they would get a plain decoration because it wasn't worthwhile spending the extra money. Because everything costs money. I mean, to us, the costs of these things mightn't seem remarkable, but they were expensive in the area where they were used. You didn't have a bow like this unless you had a fair bit of money behind you.
Yes.
Or you were working for somebody with a lot of money who gave you the bow as part of your equipment. But generally in India, certainly in the 18th and 19th centuries, soldiers brought their own equipment, except in the very organized states like Tipu Sultan state and things like that, where there were public armories, but generally when you hired on as a soldier, you brought your own equipment. And if you were lucky and they liked you, if you lost things, they would give you a replacement. If you weren't very good, you would just generally not do very well. As I say, I think this is a particularly good example of this chahr Kham type of bow. It's got all of the qualities that have been written about. It has the convex belly. It has you have a look at the shape of what I'm doing this on my screen. It's of absolutely no use to anyone. You have a look at the way the tip comes off the triangular section, which would be kasam in Turkish. Everything is very carefully thought out. One of the exceptional things about these bows, there is so much of the tip above where the string fits.
Yes.
Normally, it would be a little finger's width.
Yes.
Or maybe a little bit more. But it's almost 2/5 of the length of the tip. I'm not talking about the whole ear, just the very tip of the ear. And the only reason I can think you would do this, because it mitigates against the efficiency of the bow, is it makes it easier to string.
Yes.
And it protects the tips from breaking.
And it is also inscribed, and I'm going to make it a translation because Bede and I, we are going to write an article on that, so that if you wonder what these inscriptions mean, we are going to reserve and keep them for an article which will be published hopefully soon, Bede.
Yeah. I've done some research on this. Peter Decker helped me out by allowing me to use a very good set of cross sections and measurements he made on a Sindh bow that he had in Mandarin Mansions. You also notice, I was going to say, just below the nock, where the string is fitted into the nock of the bow, See that band there?
Mm.
Typically on Persian and Indian bows, that will be a layer of sinew wrapped around the tip to stop it splitting,
Yeah.
and then it's covered with paint or maybe very fine birch bark or something like that,
Yeah.
and then paint to protect
Yeah.
the sinew from moisture. The reason
Mm.
they did this, and this was something I only learned from some of the mishaps that Adam Karpowitz wrote in his book on Ottoman archery. Um, the enormous force that the loops of the string put on uh, the tips of the ears
Yeah.
when the string is back to its normal place, it's pulling straight towards the center. That if
Mm.
the loops are too thin, or in his case, he was testing modern material strings, they can
Mm.
cut straight down there,
Yeah, they can.
split
That's
the
true.
tip open. The Indian bows and some Persian bows had a slot cut in the tip from
Yes.
um, belly to back,
Yes.
and a piece of horn put in there, and
Mm.
that was to stop this. Like English longbow arrows have strips of horn in the nocks to stop them splitting. This
Mm.
was the same thing. It was done in bows. It was
Mm.
necessary because of the enormous force. I
Yeah.
mean, the strings, gut strings or silk strings, are springier than Dyneema strings, to use a brand name, but
Yes. Sir.
there's an awful lot of force at the end of the stroke in these bows.
Yes. Look at this. I really like this part of the bow. Look, it's. I
Oh,
think it's so beautiful.
it's taking advantage of the sections of the bow to bring out different design features. This is what
Yeah.
I like, because the person painting this looked
Yes.
at, he would have had a bare bow, like it wouldn't
Yeah.
have had anything on it except for probably a very fine layer of bark glued down. And he's looking at it and he's saying, well, it swells out here. We'll put a little medallion in. We'll put a band to isolate it. Then that will separate the bending part of the thing, and we'll put
Mm.
another band at the top. And then we've got the triangular section part. Oh, we can do this. We can do that. It's um, thinking three-dimensionally.
Yeah.
It's not just painting flat things. We've got curved things where we've got that ridge and we accentuate that with different colors.
Yes.
It's very, very artistic. These, as I say, they're often called Sindh bows because most of the ones the British collected were from Sindh province.
Yes.
When the British got control of Sindh, the emirs in Sindh were famous for collecting weapons. Like they
Mm.
were sword collectors. They would pay
Yeah.
lots of money to get a good sword, and and they were the same with bows. This was it was a practical thing, but it was also a work of art. And of course,
Mm.
the better it was,
Yes.
the higher its value. So
Yes.
the art was an embellishment on a functioning object. It wasn't just, you couldn't make a beautiful bow that didn't work because
That's
nobody
true.
would take you seriously.
That's true. Okay, this is now again what we are going to have in our
Yeah.
book, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's also
Yeah, that's
dating there. You see how
yeah.
beautiful? Really nice.
Yeah, this is the thing. You see it on Persian bows too, writing on the tips like that. It's
Yes.
not it. Ottoman bows tend to write on the belly side near the change in angle,
Yeah.
but the Iranian bows and quite a few of the Indian bows have inscriptions on the tip.
Mm.
Maybe that's another reason the tip is so big. So you've
Yeah.
got somewhere to. I don't think that's likely. I think they saw this tip and thought, "What are we going to do with this?" Ah, that's a good place to put an inscription.
Look,
Um,
diff different sides of the tape from,
yeah.
you know. Okay, that was our that was this bow from Valkovsky, Dr. Valkovsky's collection wanted to show to our viewers. Thanks, Pete,
Mhm.
for your input on this. Now let us
Oh,
move on to the bows you have and you want to show us.
okay, these are a different style of Indian bow. These are what is commonly called. Sorry, I just have to move some journals out of the way to get to them.
Mhm.
Commonly called a crab bow because, oh, and we've shown these bows before,
Yeah.
because they look like a crab's claws or a crab's the outline of a crab's shell actually as well.
Yeah.
Now you'll notice the difference in the grip. It's
Yeah.
got a very pronounced method,
Yes.
um, and it's very straight on the belly
Very.
side. So
Very.
this is for the kinds of the various types of grasps that we were talking about before.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
the other thing is that the angle between the tip, which as you can see is much narrower than the limb itself,
Yes.
angle is very smooth. There's no sharp bend like in the Sindh bow, or in even some Persian bows have a much stronger bend there, Turkish bows as well.
Yes.
You notice I'm using my forehead as a background. You notice that the end of the tip past the knock is still quite long, but nowhere near as long as in the Sindh bow.
No, no.
Um, these bows often turn up with broken knocks, um,
Mm.
possibly because they were hit against something while I was strung and it just
Mhm.
snapped off. Bearing in mind they're used in warfare, so that there's a good chance that they've
Mhm.
had a rough life. Now this is what the bow looks like um, after it's been manufactured.
Mm.
In the
After.
actual process of manufacture, these tips would have been crossed over probably. This is quite normal. Um,
Can we say there are certain regions of India which like this bow or Charkham bow?
well, as far as I can tell, the major area where Chakham was popular was in Sindh, but I think that in the Persian influenced parts of India, particularly in North India, that these bows circulate around. Remember, the Hidayat Rami, which is written in Persian in Delhi in
Yeah.
1500,
Yeah.
has four major types of bow, and one of them is Chahr. Actually, none of them are this.
No.
I think these bows probably developed in the 1700s. There are bows like this with much more profound tip
Yeah.
recurvature.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
it's really, really beautifully decorated ones, which makes me think that these are the workaday bows. But having said that, there are some that have very, very expensive decoration on them. So you've got to wonder whether this bow just kept developing, and they decided that the more recurved tips, whereas they gave an advantage in performance, made it more difficult to keep it straight and made it more difficult to string. Because you can imagine how difficult it is to string one of these.
Yeah. Very. Very.
Um, but the interesting thing is that uh, structurally these bows are very different, right? I just hit myself in the head.
Yeah.
That section from
Mm.
there to the middle of the handle, there's a strip of horn in there, which
Yeah.
is roughly half the width of the limb. And there's
Half.
another one on the right.
Mhm.
But from here on, there's a strip of wood that is no wider, usually thinner than that, which
Mhm.
goes down as the core,
Yes.
and its end is bent round and fitted into a splice on the bending part of the limb, and that splice is covered by the end of the horn. And the rest of this, the shape, the kind of triangular shape that you can see,
Yes.
that's all built up of sinew.
No, that's what you
Uh,
said. Yeah.
so it's I don't
Mm.
know, it's like having a sports car with a whale tail on it. It's meant to look nice. Whether it works or does any good, it's hard to say. Now,
Yeah.
these bows were designed to be kept strung for a week or
Yeah.
more. They're not like self bows, which are damaged by being strung. Uh, but
Mm.
they do lose power.
Yeah.
So at the end of a week, this bow it might start out, and you can see it's quite wide.
Yeah. Sure.
It might start out as a 90 or 100 pound bow. At the end of the week, it might be only a 75 pound bow. Um, that's
Does it have painting on it?
Yeah, it's got little bits of painting. I'm just having a look where I'm trying to see where it's flaked off. See that little light colored patch
Yeah, I do.
back just near my face?
Yes.
That's where the paint has flaked off. You can see the paint is about half to 3/4 of a millimeter thick.
Oh.
And there's a very fine layer. Oh, I've read about this. It's a mixture of glue and some kind of powder to make the base for the paint to be painted on. So that doesn't go as deep as you might think. Now, on the bow itself, where there is decoration, which I think is more visible on, I did see it when I was holding it before, more visible on the ears, maybe on the back of the, because it's quite simple. It's a series of lines with little bits of they come together in little cusps.
Does it
Pretty
have
hard to.
any ridges on it? I cannot tell from here.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's ridged from there to there to
Oh,
the
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. It's still springy.
Have you tried
I'm
to string it? No, you
held.
can't. No, it's not a good idea. Forget it.
Look, I'm going to show you the other bow, which is from the same workshop, I'd say, because everything is the same. Everything looks the same. I'm just trying to see. Can you see any decorative parts? It's not coming out very well on the camera. You can see
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
lines in that.
Some
But
lines, yes.
yeah, but what happens is if you leave this strung for a while and you don't give it to a bow maker to
Mm.
fix it, oh wait a minute, even like this, they're hard to handle.
Mhm.
It opens out.
Ah, that's right.
Now, if you look at the size of these pieces, they're exactly the same.
Yes.
But if you look at the angles between the ridge section,
Yeah.
it hasn't opened out as much as I thought it did, actually. Let me try and get it. See, it looks almost like a right angle there. But
Yes.
when you hold it up,
Mhm.
it hasn't actually opened out at all.
Yeah.
And then when you hold the handles next to each other, it's a bit hard to line this up with a camera. You
Mhm.
see that flat bit in the middle,
Mhm.
pretty much where it was in the whole recurve bow. What's happened is that the bending section, or the center part of the bending section, has flattened out.
Mhm.
And you can see that when you compare them to each other.
True.
So when you compare the handles to each other, you can see that's that particular area. It's about there where the
Mm.
bend has gone away.
Yeah.
But people often in articles would see, I mean, this one's, I'm lucky because it's got more recurve in one end, or more reflex in one end than the other.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and so you can see more of what it was originally like.
Yeah.
But people said, oh, they're two different types of bow.
Yeah.
One is the highly reflex bow, and the other one is not quite so reflex.
Mhm.
But it's not true. And this one you can actually see the painting on, I think.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So it's got
Yeah.
lines. It's got like a little stylized tree.
Yeah.
Um, I think it doesn't have much on the back. There are lines on the, there's more around the ridges actually. If you
Mm. Yeah.
so it also doesn't have quite so long
Mhm.
a tip. This one is roughly
Mhm.
the width of my finger.
Yeah.
Now there's also oh, actually, if you look at the grip, you can see there's little painted like flowers on it.
Yeah.
And most of these bows have these three little strings under the paint surface that come
Yes.
together on the back of the grip, which just tell you exactly where the center of the grip is. So when you pick the
Yeah.
bow up, you don't have
Yeah.
to fiddle around. You can feel it with your fingers. Um,
Yeah.
Now, weirdly enough, this one's, I'm just having a look.
Mhm.
There's more color at that end.
Mhm.
Try and see if you can see it.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, so there's
Mhm.
there's a fair amount of decoration. The one that I lent to Zhang Yuhua
Mhm.
in Taiwan actually has clearly painted flowers, and it's much more attractive than these. These are pretty workaday, but even a workaday bow was well made.
Mm. No, that's true.
And again, this one you can see they're fairly wide, not as wide as Persian bows, but still fairly wide.
Very wide, yeah.
When you feel it very carefully, you can feel the slight bulge where the horn is.
Yeah.
They've kind of filled it up to make it look as though it's a full strip of horn. But
Yes.
they used a narrow strip. Now, until somebody see, quite a few people have made really beautiful versions of these bows, like Lucas Novotny, for instance, mate.
Mm.
Absolutely, and it's on YouTube. You can see it. You can see
Mm.
him making it. But they used full width horn
Mm.
as they constructed it more like a Turkish bow.
Mm.
Uh, and that's an extra amount of weight. I think what they did with these was they tried to minimize the weight in the limbs. It
Mm.
it might have been as simple as horn was more expensive than sinew, and they filled in where they would normally use horn with sinew. But there's so many of these bows survive that I find that very hard to believe. I think
In
that
which
what we're
sense did you find hard to believe what?
I find it hard to believe that they were economizing on horn by like the the belly is that shape and there's a strip of horn that covers the middle of it, and they actually filled up to the edges of the strip of horn with sinew and then painted over it to make it look as though it was a smooth piece of horn when it wasn't. Whereas in the Sindh bows, it is.
It
And
is.
my guess is that they found with these bows
Mhm.
that they would work
Mhm.
almost as well,
Almost
and
as
it's
well.
and it's easier to balance them. See, twisting in bows with horned bellies is sometimes quite a problem. So if you can increase the stability by having the wooden part wider, because the wood is more stable than horn in twisting,
Yeah.
maybe that's why they were doing it. Edward McEwen said to me once in a phone call we had that
Mm.
he'd made one of these bows in the traditional manner. I think it was about 95 pound or something like that. And he said he'd also made Turkish war bows, and he said they shot pretty much the same. And if you could get, like three bows out of a pair of buffalo horns instead of just one, then there's obviously an advantage,
No,
I
of
mean, an
course.
economic advantage, and sourcing material is always going to be an issue. If you live in a country where water buffalo are commonly used agricultural animals, you think, oh, there's tons of horns and tons of stuff, but not necessarily, because you keep your water buffalo until it's really old, and maybe its horns aren't in really good condition when it's really old. Maybe they're not as strong. They're certainly not as flexible. Everyone says that horns of younger animals are more flexible,
Yeah.
and that's part of what you want, because the horn isn't getting it's not contributing its stiffness to the bow by its flexibility.
Yeah.
It's contributing it by being compressed by
Yes.
being on the inside of the curve. It's a compression structure.
Yeah.
And so it's not relying on how stiff it is, it's relying on how much it resists compression. And
No, of
if
course.
it's a bit more flexible, it means it's a lot easier to form it around the core of the bow when you're making the bow in the first place. So maybe it's an advantage that we just don't know about because we don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. See, this is the problem when you're dealing. See, when Balfour wrote his article on composite bows, it's
Yeah.
very dismissive of these bows
Hey,
because he said,
why?
"Oh, they're not as good as the Persian ones or the Turkish ones. They don't cover the belly with horn. They don't do this. They don't do that. They're just meant to look like good bows." But this can't be true.
No, it's
You don't keep making bows for your army if they don't work.
no, of course
I
not.
mean, so what? See, this was the the English, because they controlled India,
Yeah.
accepted all kinds of rankings and stratas in society.
Yeah.
Um, there's even a book, The Martial Races of India, where they rank each individual group
Yeah.
on how warlike they are. This is all rubbish. I mean, uh, the sure, the Rajputs and the Jats were great warriors, but it was
Yeah.
because of their warrior culture, not because of their they said physical size, and they're more amenable to following orders. And this is all, it's kind of basic. It was the 19th century's understanding of race, right?
Yeah.
Well, at the
That's right.
time, they thought they were being very scientific and dividing people up into types and everything like that. But we now know, not quite so right. But
Yes.
but as I say, these bows survive.
Yes.
There's all composite bows that were made,
Mm.
in the last. I mean, the oldest composite bows fully intact that I know of, or semi-intact, are the ones in Georgia in Svaneti. So
Mm.
these are bows that were given as a gift to a church or a monastery in the 8th or 9th century, and they're still fairly intact. I mean, the more extreme types of bow, the three limbed on each end, the 6 limb bows, they're missing limbs and that because insects like eating horn and things get dropped, and there'd been quite a few invasions between the time they put the bow in the church and today, not counting the Mongols, the Timurids, the Safavids, the Ottomans, and the Russians. I mean, that's a lot of people to go through and be burning of buildings and whatnot.
Yeah.
But having said that, uh, there's a lot of bows
Yes.
from the 1500s, late 1400s, 1500s. When I say a lot, I mean, probably can count them on the fingers of
Yeah.
2 hands. But from Persia and Turkey and China, from the
Mhm.
1600s onwards, the Manchu bows, there's a lot of really old bows that have survived,
Yes.
and their structural integrity shows that they were well made. Now, everybody had a different way of using their bows.
Yeah.
In India, um, the I mean, I've got a lot of Indian arrows. I've got them sitting up there. We might look at
Mm.
them at another time.
Yes.
Um, but they tend to be roughly of a standard size.
Mhm.
War arrows are. So
Yeah.
there's tribal arrows that are different lengths because India had the full range of archery cultures, from
Yes.
the highly technically made Sindh bow and the crab bow and several other types of bow that were popular, to bamboo bows used by tribesmen.
Yes. That's true.
And they were still effective because Rajput lords hired tribesmen
Yes.
to
Yes.
provide artists for them. So there weren't, it wasn't just completely outclassed. It definitely
Yes.
worked. Maybe they had a lot more other skills that were very valuable as well that we don't know of in detail. Somebody might. But this
Mhm.
thing, these are effective bows. If you got shot by one of these,
Yeah.
and there are reports of people being shot by these in European accounts of the siege of Lucknow,
Yes.
where uh, soldiers on the British side stuck their heads up because they were city surrounded by walls, and then they put entrenchments, and they'd stick their head out of the trench, and an arrow would go through their forehead and out the back of their head and drop on the ground. And there are surviving arrows where you can clearly see they made the arrowheads at the time because they didn't have enough original
Yes.
arrowheads,
Yes.
and they shot through shields. They were really very effective, and
Mhm.
that's all you need.
Absolutely.
They had guns for people that were 300 yards away,
Mm.
and they had bows for people who were 50 to 100 yards away.
Yes.
And
Thank
when
you
you got
very
close,
much, Pete. Is there anything you would like to add for today's discussion?
well, I just want to comment on the really high quality of the decoration on that bow that you showed. I think that is outstanding, and it's
Yes.
really important to know how good these craftsmen were,
Yeah. True.
because they're not alive now, but they certainly deserve our respect.
Yes, they do. Absolutely, they do. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Pete. It was really nice having you here. Thanks a lot and have a nice day.
Thank you very much.